I was staring at my phone in the middle of a forward operating base in Kuwait when the notification popped up that someone was inside my cabin. The security camera alert came through at 0:30, and I figured it had to be a malfunction or maybe a bear, because nobody should have been anywhere near my property in the mountains outside Boulder, Colorado. I had paid my HOA dues before deploying 6 months ago, locked everything up tight, and informed my neighbors I would be overseas with the Army. What I saw on the live feed made my blood run cold in a way that had nothing to do with the desert heat. A middle-aged woman with a sharp blonde bob was letting herself in through my front door with an actual key, followed by what looked like an entire family carrying suitcases and vacation gear. I watched in real time as this stranger walked through my living room like she owned the place, pointing out features to the people behind her as if she was giving a tour. The family consisted of 2 adults and 3 kids who immediately started running around, touching my stuff, opening cabinets, and making themselves at home. I screen recorded everything and immediately sent it to my platoon sergeant, Xavier Winters, who had been helping me handle some stateside affairs while I was deployed. Xavier had my power of attorney for emergencies, and this definitely qualified. He responded within minutes with a simple message that I would come to appreciate more than I could have imagined. "I'm on it. Keep recording everything." The woman on my security feed was talking animatedly, gesturing around my cabin like a real estate agent showing off a premium listing. I'd spent 3 years fixing up that property, installing those cameras, building custom furniture, and creating a retreat where I could escape from the world when I needed it. My hands were shaking as I zoomed in on her face, trying to figure out who she was and how she had gotten a key to my front door. That was when I recognized her. Brenda Carmichael, the vice president of our HOA. I had dealt with her exactly twice since buying the cabin, both times when she had shown up unannounced to complain about minor violations that turned out to be completely made up. The first time, she claimed my trash cans were visible from the street, which was impossible because I kept them in a bear-proof enclosure behind the cabin. The second time, she insisted my deck stain was not an approved color, despite the fact that I had used the exact shade listed in the HOA guidelines. Both times, I had documented everything and proved her wrong, which clearly had not endeared me to her. Now she was in my house with my key, renting out my property to strangers. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could see on the cameras. I had installed a comprehensive system with cameras covering the living room, kitchen, both entrances, and the exterior of the property. The audio was crystal clear, and I could hear Brenda explaining to the family that they had rented this exclusive mountain getaway for 2 weeks at a rate of $1,500 per week, $3,000 for a property that was not hers to rent. The father of the family asked about the personal items everywhere, and Brenda waved it off dismissively. "The owner is overseas indefinitely and has authorized the HOA to manage the property in their absence. Everything here is part of the rustic charm package. Just be respectful of the belongings." I had authorized nothing. I had informed the HOA president, a reasonable guy named Malcolm Chen, that I would be deployed and provided my contact information for emergencies. I had never spoken to Brenda about property management, rental agreements, or anything else that would give her the authority to do what she was doing. Xavier called me 20 minutes later. "Xander, I just got to the property. The cabin is occupied, and there's a silver Lexus in the driveway that matches the registration for Brenda Carmichael. I'm recording everything from the outside, and I've already contacted the sheriff's department. They're sending a deputy, but they said since she's the HOA vice president and has a key, this might be considered a civil matter rather than breaking and entering. She's renting out my house, Xavier. I'm watching her take money from these people right now on the security feed." "I know, man. I can see her through the window. She just handed them a welcome packet and everything. This is absolutely insane." His voice had that edge it got when he was keeping himself under control through sheer force of will. Xavier was not someone you wanted to cross, which was probably why he had made Sergeant First Class by age 32. "The deputy should be here in about 15 minutes. I'm going to wait and show them the evidence you're sending me." I watched as Brenda completed her little orientation, showing the family where the firewood was stored, how to operate the wood stove, and where the extra linens were kept. She knew way too much about the layout of my cabin, which meant she had been inside before, probably multiple times. The violation of privacy made me feel sick, but I forced myself to stay calm and keep documenting. The family seemed nice enough, completely unaware that they were victims of what was essentially fraud. The kids were excited about the vacation, running around and claiming bedrooms. The mother was admiring the view from the deck. The father was inspecting the wood stove and asking Brenda questions about local hiking trails. They had no idea they were in the middle of what was about to become a legal nightmare. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, Xavier met him outside and showed him everything I had sent, plus his own recordings. I could not hear what they were saying, but I watched through the exterior camera as the deputy's expression changed from mildly interested to seriously concerned. He made a phone call, then knocked on my front door. Brenda answered with a bright smile that faltered when she saw the uniform. "Can I help you, officer?" "Madam, I need to speak with you outside, please." "I'm in the middle of helping some guests get settled. Can this wait?" "No, madam, it cannot. Please step outside." I watched Brenda's face go through several expressions: confusion, irritation, and then calculation. She stepped onto the deck and closed the door behind her. The deputy's body camera caught most of what happened next, which Xavier later sent me. "Madam, are you Brenda Carmichael?" "Yes, I'm the vice president of the Whispering Pines HOA. Is there a problem? Can you explain why you're in this property and what authority you have to be here?" "The owner is overseas, and the HOA has the right to maintain and manage properties that appear abandoned or neglected. It's in our bylaws." "Do you have documentation that this property was abandoned or neglected?" Brenda's smile tightened. "The owner has been gone for 6 months with no end date for return. That constitutes abandonment according to our interpretation of the covenants." "Your interpretation does not override Colorado property law, madam. The owner is actively deployed with the U.S. Army, which is protected status. He maintains insurance and pays his HOA dues. He has security systems actively monitoring the property, which I'm told you knew about because you're standing right in front of a camera right now." That was when Brenda realized she had made a catastrophic mistake. The color drained from her face. We were just trying to maintain the property value for the whole community. By renting it out and keeping the money, I need you to explain how you obtained keys to this property." "I'm on the HOA board. We have master keys for emergencies." "This is not an emergency, madam. This is theft of services at minimum, possibly fraud, trespassing, and illegal subletting. I'm going to need you to refund whatever money you collected from these people and help me explain to them that they need to find other accommodations." The next hour was chaos. The family was understandably upset and confused. They had booked what they thought was a legitimate vacation rental through a website that Brenda had apparently set up specifically for this purpose. The deputy found 3 other properties listed on the same site, all belonging to HOA members who were either elderly, traveling, or otherwise away from their homes for extended periods. Brenda had been running a rental scam using HOA access for at least 8 months. Xavier stayed at the property after everyone left, securing it and changing all the locks. He found evidence that Brenda had been using my cabin regularly, not just for rentals. There were personal items in one of the guest bedrooms, clothing, toiletries, and paperwork that suggested she had been treating my place as a second home. Among the papers were financial documents showing that she had rented my property at least 6 times since I deployed, collecting over $12,000. "Xander, this is worse than we thought," Xavier told me over the phone later that night. "She's got a whole operation going. The HOA master keys gave her access to dozens of properties, and she's been selectively targeting ones where the owners are gone for extended periods. I found rental agreements, fake property management company documents, everything. She's been doing this systematically." "Have they arrested her?" "Not yet. They're building the case. The detective assigned wants to gather all the evidence before making a move. They're worried she might have accomplices on the HOA board. The good news is that everything is documented now and your property is secure. I'm going to stay here tonight to make sure nobody tries to come back." I felt a surge of gratitude for having someone like Xavier watching my back. "Man, I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me. This is what we do. Besides, what she did is not just wrong, it's criminal. Service members have enough to worry about without wondering if someone is stealing from them back home." Over the next week, the investigation expanded rapidly. The detective, a sharp woman named Detective Torres, discovered that Brenda had rented out 7 different properties, collecting over $60,000 that had gone straight into her personal accounts. She'd created an LLC called Mountain Serenity Property Management to make everything look legitimate, but she had never informed any of the actual property owners that they were supposedly clients of her company. The other victims started coming forward. An elderly couple who spent winters in Arizona came home to find their house had been rented out multiple times. A tech worker who traveled frequently for business discovered strangers had been sleeping in his bed. A divorced dad who only used his cabin on weekends found out it had been a vacation rental during the week. Every single one of them was furious, and every single one of them wanted prosecution. The HOA president, Malcolm Chen, was horrified. He called Xavier directly to apologize and explained that he had no knowledge of what Brenda had been doing. The master keys were supposed to be for genuine emergencies only, like fires or water leaks. We had protocols in place, but Brenda had access to the key box and apparently just helped herself. I'm calling an emergency board meeting to address this and figure out how she bypassed our safeguards. Meanwhile, I was still in Kuwait, watching all of this unfold through phone calls, emails, and security footage. The frustration of being unable to deal with it in person was overwhelming, but Xavier was handling everything with the kind of efficiency that made him an excellent sergeant. He documented every interaction, kept detailed records, and worked closely with Detective Torres to build an airtight case. 2 weeks after the initial incident, Brenda was arrested at her home. The charges were extensive: 7 counts of theft, multiple counts of fraud, burglary, criminal trespass, and violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act for specifically targeting me while I was deployed. The last charge was a federal offense that carried serious penalties. Xavier sent me the video of her arrest. She tried to maintain her composure, insisting there had been a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. They found over $70,000 in her accounts, directly traceable to the rental scheme, detailed records of all her bookings, and even a spreadsheet where she had tracked which properties were most profitable and when owners would be away. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later, and I was able to attend via video conference. Seeing Brenda in an orange jumpsuit, looking considerably less confident than she had in my living room, provided a certain amount of satisfaction. Her attorney tried to argue that she had been operating under a good faith interpretation of HOA bylaws, but the prosecution demolished that argument by showing that she had hidden all the rental income, never reported it to the HOA board, and had explicitly created fake documentation to deceive renters into thinking they were booking legitimate properties. The judge was not sympathetic. Ms. Carmichael, you held a position of trust within your community and used that trust to systematically steal from your neighbors. You violated the sanctity of their homes, profited from their absence, and showed particular callousness by targeting a deployed service member. These are not the actions of someone operating in good faith. Bail was set at $100,000. Brenda's family posted it, but the conditions were strict: house arrest, ankle monitor, surrender of passport, and absolutely no contact with any HOA members or victims. Back at the cabin, Xavier was still discovering the extent of the invasion. He found that Brenda had been going through my personal belongings, reading my mail, and even accessing my home office. She had taken photos of family pictures, presumably to make the rental listing look more authentic, with rustic personal touches. The violation was profound and infuriating. She was treating your place like it was her own private vacation home, Xavier told me, his voice tight with anger. There's evidence she had friends over for parties, used your kitchen to cook meals, drank your liquor. She even wrote in the guest book you kept on the coffee table, pretending to be a satisfied guest of her own rental scam. I had Xavier collect every piece of evidence, document every violation, and work with Detective Torres to add it all to the case. The Service Members Civil Relief Act violations were particularly important because they carried enhanced penalties and potential federal charges. The local prosecutor was coordinating with a federal attorney to determine if they wanted to pursue additional charges. The other victims were pursuing civil cases as well. The elderly couple sued for damages, emotional distress, and the cost of having to professionally clean and sanitize their home. The tech worker discovered some of his electronics had been damaged and files had been accessed. The divorced dad found that renters had broken several items and left the place a mess after one particularly rowdy weekend. Every new detail made Brenda's actions look worse. The HOA held an emergency meeting that Xavier attended on my behalf with power of attorney. Malcolm Chen proposed a complete overhaul of their security protocols, including no more master keys held by individual board members. All emergency access would require 2 board members present and would be video recorded and logged. Immediate removal of Brenda from all positions and authority within the HOA. Full audit of all HOA finances to ensure no other funds had been misappropriated. Written apology to all victims and offer to cooperate fully with law enforcement and civil litigation. New insurance policies to protect against board member malfeasance. The proposals passed unanimously among the remaining board members. Malcolm personally apologized to Xavier and asked him to convey their deepest regrets to me. What Brenda did is unconscionable. She's destroyed the trust that makes an HOA function. We're going to do everything we can to make this right and ensure it never happens again. Xavier also discovered that Brenda had been falsifying HOA violation notices to other homeowners, using her position to harass people she did not like or to pressure them into paying fines for non-existent infractions. The rabbit hole kept getting deeper. At least 4 other homeowners came forward with complaints about Brenda's behavior, including claims that she had entered their properties without permission for inspections that were not authorized by the board. One particularly disturbing discovery was that Brenda had been keeping detailed notes on all the homeowners, including their schedules, when they received mail, who visited them, and when their homes appeared empty. It was not just opportunistic theft, it was systematic surveillance and stalking. I was scheduled to redeploy in 2 months, but the legal proceedings were moving faster than I expected. The prosecutor offered Brenda a plea deal. Plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 5 years in state prison, full restitution to all victims, and permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board or property management position. The alternative was going to trial on both state and federal charges, which could result in 15 to 20 years if convicted on everything. Brenda's attorney advised her to take the deal. She refused. She actually thinks she can win this, Xavier told me, incredulous. Her lawyer's apparently pulling his hair out because she insists she was within her rights as an HOA board member. She's completely delusional. The trial was scheduled for 2 months later, which meant I would be back stateside and able to attend in person. The prosecutor was pleased about that. Having you there in uniform will be powerful for the jury. You represent exactly why these protections exist for service members. This woman violated your home while you were serving overseas. That's going to resonate. As the trial date approached, more details emerged. Brenda had been struggling financially after a divorce 2 years earlier. Her ex-husband had gotten the larger house, and she had been left with significant debt. Rather than address her problems legally, she had apparently decided to monetize her HOA position. The rental scheme had started small, just renting out her own condo occasionally. But when she realized how much money vacation rentals could generate in the Boulder Mountain area, she had expanded to using her HOA access to rent other people's properties. The prosecution's theory was that Brenda had specifically targeted properties whose owners she believed would not notice or would be unable to respond quickly. Elderly owners who spent months away, frequent travelers and deployed military members were perfect victims in her mind. She could rent their properties during their absences, pocket the cash, and clean up before they returned. She had almost gotten away with it. What Brenda had not counted on was security cameras with remote access and someone like Xavier who could respond immediately. I redeployed on schedule and spent a week getting reacclimated before the trial began. Xavier met me at the airport, and we drove up to the cabin together. Seeing it in person after 6 months, knowing what had happened, was surreal. Everything looked normal on the surface, but I could not shake the feeling of violation, knowing that strangers had slept in my bed, used my kitchen, sat on my furniture, all while Brenda profited from it. "We cleaned everything professionally," Xavier said. "Changed all the linens, had the whole place deep cleaned and sanitized. Malcolm from the HOA actually paid for it out of his own pocket as an apology, even though he wasn't involved in what Brenda did. That was decent of him. He feels terrible about the whole thing. The HOA is actually pretty embarrassed. They're implementing all those security changes and have been bending over backward to make things right, with everyone Brenda victimized. The trial started on a Monday morning in Boulder County District Court. The courtroom was packed with victims, their families, HOA members, and local media who had picked up on the story. The headline, HOA Vice President Ran Vacation Rental Scam Using Neighbors' Homes, had gotten significant attention, especially with the angle about targeting a deployed service member. I sat in the front row in my Army dress uniform, as the prosecutor had requested. Xavier sat beside me, also in uniform. The visual impact was exactly what the prosecution wanted. Two soldiers, one of whom had been victimized while serving overseas, showing the jury exactly what was at stake. Brenda entered looking surprisingly defiant for someone facing serious prison time. She had clearly been coached by her attorney to appear professional and sympathetic, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, but her expression was hard and unapologetic. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. The assistant district attorney, a methodical prosecutor named Richard Stone, laid out the entire scheme in clear, damning detail. He showed the jury the fake website Brenda had created, the rental agreements she had signed using forged property management company credentials, the bank records showing over $70,000 in deposits, and the security camera footage of her letting strangers into my cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda Carmichael was entrusted with the keys to her neighbors' homes for emergencies. Instead, she used that trust to run a criminal enterprise. She violated the sanctity of people's homes, invaded their privacy, and profited from their absence. And when Army Specialist Xander Wright deployed overseas to serve his country, Ms. Carmichael saw an opportunity. She saw a property she could rent out repeatedly with little chance of being caught because the owner was thousands of miles away. What she did not anticipate was that Specialist Wright had security cameras, and she definitely did not anticipate that his sergeant would be watching those feeds and would respond immediately to protect his soldiers' property. The defense attorney, a private lawyer named Gerald Richmond, tried a different approach. My client made mistakes. She acknowledges that her judgment was poor and that she should have communicated better with property owners. But this was not a criminal enterprise. This was a misguided attempt to help maintain property values and generate income for community improvements. Ms. Carmichael believed, in good faith, that she was acting within the scope of her authority as an HOA board member. The prosecution spent the next 3 days systematically destroying that argument. They called Malcolm Chen, who testified that Brenda had never sought or received authorization to rent out anyone's property. The board would never have approved something like that. It's completely outside our authority and obviously illegal. We're an HOA, not a property management company. They called Detective Torres, who walked the jury through her investigation, showing how Brenda had created an entire fake business infrastructure to support the scam. This was not a misunderstanding. She registered an LLC, created a professional website, established business bank accounts, and developed standardized rental contracts. This was premeditated and systematic fraud. They called several of the renters who had paid Brenda for what they thought were legitimate vacation rentals. One woman testified that she had specifically asked if the owner knew about the rental, and Brenda had assured her that everything was properly authorized. She showed me paperwork that looked official. She said she was a licensed property manager. I had no reason to doubt her. They called Xavier, who described discovering the rental in progress and what he found during his investigation of the property. I found evidence that Ms. Carmichael had been using Specialist Wright's cabin as her own personal retreat. There were personal items in the bedroom, food in the refrigerator that she had brought, and a journal where she had written about enjoying the peace and quiet of her mountain getaway. She was not just renting out his property, she was living in it whenever she felt like it. That detail seemed to particularly affect the jury. Several of them looked at Brenda with visible disgust. When I took the stand, the prosecutor asked me to describe what it was like to discover my home was being rented out while I was deployed. I was in Kuwait, focused on my mission, trusting that everything back home was secure. When I got that security alert and saw strangers in my house with Brenda letting them in, I felt violated and helpless. I had paid my HOA dues, locked everything properly, and done everything right before deploying. The last thing I expected was for an HOA board member to be using my property as a rental business. How did you feel about Ms. Carmichael using your personal belongings as props for her rental listings? Angry, violated. Those are family photos, personal items, things that have meaning to me. She had no right to use them to make money or to make her fake rental look more authentic. The defense tried to suggest I was exaggerating the harm. Your property was not damaged, correct? Physical damage is not the only harm. She violated my privacy, invaded my home, and profited from my absence while I was serving overseas. The psychological impact of knowing someone was systematically exploiting me while I could not defend myself is significant. But you had Sergeant Winters to handle things for you, which I should not have needed for something like this. HOA board members are supposed to serve the community, not prey on it. The defense's case was weak. Brenda took the stand and tried to explain that she had genuinely believed she was helping the community by ensuring properties did not sit empty and attract crime. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Carmichael, if you were trying to help the community, why did you keep all the rental income instead of putting it into HOA accounts? I was planning to donate it eventually, but I had personal expenses. $70,000 in personal expenses? I had debts from my divorce. So you used your position to steal from your neighbors to pay your personal debts. I did not see it as stealing. These were properties that were not being used. Did you ask the owners for permission? I did not think I needed to. You did not think you needed permission to rent out someone else's house and keep the money? Brenda's face flushed. It was more complicated than that. How so? You took keys that were meant for emergencies, entered people's homes without permission, advertised their properties as vacation rentals, collected thousands of dollars, and never told the owners. What part of that is complicated? The prosecution showed the jury Brenda's spreadsheet, where she had tracked properties by profitability and owner absence. You have a column here labeled risk level. What does that mean? Brenda hesitated. Some owners were more likely to notice than others. And you rated Specialist Wright as low risk because he was deployed overseas, is that correct? I did not mean it that way. But that is what you wrote. Deployed military, low risk, optimal rental duration 6 months. The jury's expressions hardened. The prosecution had successfully demonstrated that Brenda had not just been careless or misguided, she had been calculating and predatory. The defense tried to recover with character witnesses, people who described Brenda as a dedicated community member and volunteer. But the prosecution countered with the other HOA victims who described her as controlling, aggressive, and willing to abuse her authority to get what she wanted. One homeowner testified that Brenda had threatened to fine him for violations that did not exist when he refused to vote her way on an HOA matter. Another described finding Brenda inside her home without permission, claiming she was inspecting for code violations despite having no authority to enter without notice. The pattern of abuse of power was clear. The closing arguments were powerful on both sides, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: 7 counts of theft, multiple counts of fraud, burglary, criminal trespass, and violation of the Service Member Civil Relief Act. Brenda's face went white as the verdicts were read. Her attorney had warned her this would happen if she did not take the plea deal, but she had insisted on her innocence right up until the moment the jury foreman said guilty for the 7th time. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The prosecution recommended 12 years in state prison, well above the 5 years that had been offered in the plea deal. The defendant showed no remorse, refused to accept responsibility, and put the victims through the trauma of a trial rather than acknowledging her crimes. She specifically targeted a deployed service member, which demonstrates particular callousness. The court should impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of these crimes and deters others who might consider similar abuse of positions of trust. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing Brenda's financial struggles and lack of prior criminal record. The judge was not moved. Ms. Carmichael, you held a position of trust in your community. You had access to your neighbors' homes for legitimate emergency purposes, and you exploited that access to run a criminal enterprise. You targeted people when they were most vulnerable: elderly residents during their seasonal absences, frequent travelers, and a deployed service member. You showed calculation, premeditation, and a complete disregard for the rights and privacy of others. Your refusal to accept responsibility, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, demonstrates a lack of remorse that concerns this court greatly. The judge sentenced Brenda to 10 years in state prison on the theft and fraud charges to run concurrently, plus an additional 2 years consecutive for the Service Member Civil Relief Act violations, 12 years total. She also ordered full restitution to all victims, including the costs of property cleaning, lock changes, security upgrades, and legal fees. Brenda was taken into custody immediately, finally seeming to realize the magnitude of what she had done. Her family was crying in the gallery. Some of the other victims looked satisfied. I felt a sense of justice being served, but also a deep weariness. This should never have happened in the first place. Outside the courthouse, several reporters wanted comments. I kept it brief. I deployed overseas to serve my country, and I trusted that my home would be secure. Brenda Carmichael violated that trust and exploited my absence for personal profit. I'm grateful to the legal system for holding her accountable and to Sergeant Winters for protecting my property when I could not. This case should serve as a reminder that positions of trust come with serious responsibilities, and abusing that trust has serious consequences. Xavier added, "Service members sacrifice enough without having to worry about being victimized at home. What Ms. Carmichael did was not just illegal, it was a betrayal of the most fundamental kind. I'm glad justice was served." The civil cases moved forward as well. I sued Brenda for damages, emotional distress, and violation of my privacy rights. The other victims filed similar suits. Between the criminal restitution and the civil judgments, Brenda would be paying for her crimes for the rest of her life. The HOA implemented all their proposed reforms and then some. Malcolm Chen led the effort to create one of the most transparent and accountable HOA systems in the state. Every board action was logged and required multiple approvals. Emergency access to properties required documented justification and was video recorded. Financial audits were conducted quarterly by independent accountants. They even created a property owner bill of rights that explicitly protected owners from board overreach. "We learned a hard lesson," Malcolm told me when we met to discuss the changes. "One bad actor with too much power can cause tremendous harm. We are committed to making sure this never happens again." I appreciated the effort, but I also decided to upgrade my security systems even further. I installed additional cameras, smart locks that logged every entry and exit, and sensors on every window and door. I also worked with a lawyer to create clear documentation of my property rights and limitations on HOA access. If anyone ever tried something like this again, they would be caught immediately and face an even stronger legal response. Xavier and I developed a protocol for service members in the community to protect their properties during deployments. We worked with local veterans organizations to create a checklist of security measures, legal protections, and trusted contacts who could monitor properties. The Brenda Carmichael case became a cautionary tale used in military legal briefings about property rights and the Service Member Civil Relief Act. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Brenda's attorney informing me that she wanted to apologize. I was skeptical, but agreed to receive a written statement. The letter that arrived a week later was surprisingly genuine. "Mr. Wright, I know that no apology can undo what I did to you and the others I victimized. I was in a dark place financially and emotionally after my divorce, and I made terrible choices. I convinced myself that I was not really hurting anyone because the properties were empty, but I now understand how deeply I violated your trust and privacy. What I did to you while you were deployed was particularly inexcusable. You were serving your country, and I exploited your absence for personal gain. I am deeply ashamed. I'm using my time in prison to reflect on my actions and work toward becoming a better person. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand the harm I caused and take full responsibility for it." I did not respond to the letter, but I kept it. It did not change what had happened, but it was some acknowledgement that she finally understood the magnitude of her actions. The cabin became my retreat again, though it took time to feel comfortable there. I had everything professionally cleaned multiple times, changed all the locks, and even rearranged some furniture to make it feel less like the space I had seen violated on those security cameras. Xavier came up to help me rebuild the sense of sanctuary the place had once provided. "You know what the crazy thing is?" I said to him one evening as we sat on the deck watching the sunset over the mountains. "If she had just asked, I probably would have let someone rent it while I was gone. If the HOA had approached me with a legitimate property management proposal and offered to share the rental income, I might have considered it. But she just took it, like my property and my rights did not matter." "That is the criminal mindset," Xavier said. "She thought she was entitled to it because she had access. She confused opportunity with permission, and she targeted you specifically because she thought you could not do anything about it from overseas. That is what makes it so much worse." We sat in silence for a while, the peace of the mountains slowly working its way back into my consciousness. The legal battles were over. Brenda was in prison. The HOA had reformed. My property was secure. But the psychological impact of the violation lingered. Over the following year, I slowly reclaimed the cabin as my own. I hosted friends and family, created new memories to overlay the ones tainted by Brenda's actions. I built new furniture to replace some of the pieces she had used and photographed for her rental listings. I took down the family photos she had exploited and replaced them with new ones that felt uncontaminated. Xavier became a regular visitor, treating the cabin as a shared retreat where we could decompress from military life. We hiked the surrounding mountains, fished in nearby streams, and spent evenings around the fire pit talking about everything and nothing. The friendship that had been forged through crisis became one of the most valuable things in my life. The HOA continued to reach out periodically with updates on their reforms and to ensure I felt comfortable in the community again. Malcolm Chen proved to be an excellent HOA president, bringing transparency and accountability that should have been there from the beginning. Several of the other victims also reached out, forming a sort of informal support network of people who understood what it felt like to have your home violated by someone you should have been able to trust. 2 years after the initial incident, I received notice that Brenda was requesting early parole. The thought of her getting out after serving just a fraction of her sentence was infuriating, but I prepared a victim impact statement for the parole board explaining why she should serve her full term. The parole board denied her request. They cited her lack of remorse during the trial, the calculated nature of her crimes, and the serious violation of trust involved. She would be eligible for parole again in 3 years, but for now, she would remain incarcerated. I felt a sense of closure with that decision. Justice was not just about the initial sentencing. It was about following through and ensuring that serious crimes received serious consequences. The cabin property values in the area had increased significantly, and I occasionally considered selling and moving on from the place that held such mixed memories. But every time I got close to making that decision, I would spend a weekend there and remember why I had bought it in the first place. The peace, the beauty, the sense of retreat from the world, those things were mine, and I refused to let Brenda Carmichael's actions take them from me permanently. Xavier got promoted to Master Sergeant and was eventually stationed at Fort Carson, close enough that he could still visit regularly. We joked that the cabin had become his second home, which was fine with me. He had earned it by protecting the place when I could not. The security camera system that had caught Brenda in the act remained in place, upgraded and improved. I checked it regularly, not out of paranoia, but out of reasonable caution. The cameras had proven their worth, and they gave me peace of mind whenever I was away from the property. 3 years after sentencing, Brenda was eligible for parole again. This time, I did not fight it as hard. She had served 5 years, paid significant restitution, and by all accounts had been a model prisoner. Her second letter to me had been even more genuine than the first, showing real growth and understanding. I submitted a statement saying that while I could never forget what she did, I would not oppose parole if the board felt she had been sufficiently rehabilitated. The parole board granted her release under strict conditions, continued restitution payments, 5 years of supervised parole, absolute prohibition on serving in any HOA or property management capacity, and mandatory counseling. She was released to a halfway house in Denver and barred from returning to the Whispering Pines area. I heard through Malcolm that Brenda had gotten a job doing data entry for a small company and was living a quiet, modest life, focused on paying her debts and staying out of trouble. She would be making restitution payments for decades, but she was apparently committed to fulfilling her obligations. Life moved on. I completed my military service and transitioned to civilian life, taking a job with a defense contractor that allowed me to live in Colorado full-time. The cabin became my primary residence, and I poured energy into making it everything I had originally envisioned. I built a workshop, expanded the deck, and created hiking trails on the property. Xavier retired from the Army after 20 years and moved to Boulder, close enough that we could grab beers regularly and continue the friendship that had been forged through crisis. We often reflected on the insanity of the Brenda situation and how a simple security camera alert had unraveled an entire criminal operation. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Xavier said during one of our deck conversations. "What if you had not installed those cameras? What if she had gotten away with it for years? How many more people would she have victimized?" I think about that too. The cameras were almost an afterthought when I installed them. I just wanted to be able to check on the place while I was deployed. I never imagined they would catch something like that. That is the thing about security systems. You install them hoping you will never need them, and then one day, they prove their worth beyond anything you imagined. The Whispering Pines, HOA, became something of a model for reform. They were featured in several articles about HOA accountability and transparency. Malcolm Chen gave presentations at property management conferences about implementing oversight systems to prevent board member abuse. The Brenda Carmichael case was used as a teaching example in law schools about property rights and abuse of fiduciary duty. I occasionally got contacted by reporters wanting to do follow-up stories on the case. I usually declined, preferring to let the past stay in the past, but I did participate in one documentary about HOA abuse because I felt the lessons were important. The documentary featured several of Brenda's victims and highlighted how easily trusted positions can be exploited without proper oversight. 5 years after the initial incident, I was finally able to think about what happened without anger or violation. The cabin was fully mine again in every sense. The memories of Brenda's intrusion had faded, replaced by years of positive experiences and personal growth. The security cameras remained, but I checked them less obsessively, trusting that the reforms and protections in place would prevent anything similar from happening again. Xavier and I were sitting on the deck one evening, much like we had countless times before, when he raised his beer in a toast. To security cameras, vigilant sergeants, and justice served, I clinked my bottle against his, and to homes that are actually our own, protected by law and defended by friends. Amen to that. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The peace I had sought when I first bought this cabin had been violated, fought for, and ultimately reclaimed. The journey had been difficult and infuriating, but it had also demonstrated the importance of protecting what is yours, the value of having people who will fight for you when you cannot fight for yourself, and the reality that justice, while sometimes slow, can eventually prevail. Brenda Carmichael had tried to exploit my absence and turn my property into her personal profit center. She had underestimated the power of modern security systems and the dedication of someone like Xavier Winters. Her 12-year journey through the criminal justice system trial, conviction, imprisonment, and supervised release served as a stark reminder that positions of trust come with real responsibilities and that violating that trust carries serious consequences. The HOA had learned that oversight and accountability are not optional extras, but essential protections against the inevitable few who will abuse power if given the chance. Malcolm Chen's reforms had transformed Whispering Pines from a place where one person could systematically exploit neighbors into a community with checks and balances that actually worked. For me, the experience had been a brutal lesson in the importance of protecting your property even when you think it is secure, the value of documentation and evidence, and the reality that you can never fully control what happens when you are away. But it had also shown me the strength of friendship, the power of justice, and the possibility of reclaiming peace after violation. The cabin stood solid and secure, mine in every legal and moral sense, protected by cameras, locks, reformed HOA bylaws, and the watchful eyes of a friend who had proven his loyalty when it mattered most. Brenda had tried to take it from me, and she had failed, That failure, and the consequences she faced because of it, stood as testament to the principle that some things are worth fighting for, even from thousands of miles away in a desert deployment. And if anyone ever tried something similar again, those security cameras would be watching, and the legal system would be ready. Because the story of HOA Karren, who rented my cabin while I was overseas, had become a cautionary tale throughout Colorado and beyond, a reminder that technology, vigilance, and justice can combine to protect what is rightfully yours, even when you cannot be there to defend it yourself.